Welcome back to Power Lunch. President-elect Donald Trump has already started filling key positions in his second administration. So far, he's chosen a chief of staff, a border czar, a UN ambassador, an EPA administrator, and today, reports suggest his next pick will be Florida Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, a known foreign policy hawk who has taken hardline positions on China, Iran, and Venezuela. For more, let's bring in Dewardric McNeal, Longview Global's senior policy analyst, and here on set with us, Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. Both are CNBC contributors. It's great to have you here. Michelle, what policy-wise do you think Rubio as Secretary of State indicates? And I hate to bring everything back to oil, but I know he's been hawkish on the Israel issue as well.
So, China hawk, number one. What makes him interesting, I think, as a China hawk is also his very deep knowledge of Latin America and his concerns about China's involvement in Latin America, lending to Latin America, buying their supply chains out of Latin America. He's an extreme hawk on Venezuela and on Cuba as well. So bringing all those together. And I think also the fact that, that Florida is now a red state. So the replacement there is, you don't have to worry about losing somebody in the Senate.
It's a guarantee. Whether DeSantis would say, hey, I'm going to step down as governor and be a senator. Who knows? I mean,
that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that.
Nor had I.
Dreaming.
It could happen.
Dewardric, what do you think of what Michelle just said there about Mr. Rubio, Senator Rubio, I should say, and would he? Let's talk specifically about China. How much tougher and adversarial will the Trump administration be with respect to China than the Biden administration has been?
Hi, Tyler. Great to see you. Yes, I absolutely agree with the way Michelle laid this out. Let me just say, I think for the China community writ large here in Washington, that's Democrats and Republicans, Rubio is a very well-known quantity. You won't get many objections from the China-watching crowd over him as Secretary of State, if that is the pick. He served the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Intelligence Committee, the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, which means, Tyler, he knows how foreign policy is shaped, set, funded, and executed, and that will bode well for U.S.-China policy. In terms of continuity, there are some continuities that I would see with the Biden administration. That's largely around the approach to allies and using allies to compete with China. The problem is the divergence. And the divergence, to your point, is this is shaping up to be a very hawkish U.S.-China policy under the Trump administration. And allies are going to have a very difficult time taking the gloves off completely and moving away from a managed competition framework, which we saw under Biden. So there could be some issues there with allies and businesses who don't want to see this sort of unbridled competition that I think we may see under the early days of the Trump administration.
Michelle, the other thing I think about is when John Bolton, I think Trump had said something like, I loved bringing him into the room because everyone else got scared and knew this guy might do something crazy. And so how much of this is a bargaining chip to kind of intimidate people into thinking, he might really go as far as he says he's going to go on this. And then Trump in the back of his mind maybe go, and maybe I will if you don't follow through. I know we're talking about China, but I wonder if Russia is the area where we actually could see the most activity in the next couple of months. They're obviously kind of heating up right now what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Russia has been releasing a lot of aggressive statements about Trump and kind of doing aggressive things already, which make you wonder if they see if they are worried about how this relationship might kick off.
Every single pick thus far speaks to his confidence, Trump's confidence about how he performed in the election and where he wants to go and how tough he wants to be when it comes to foreign policy and on countries that he thinks taking advantage of the United States and also absolutely sending a message to Russia. The one thing I would say...
What's the message to Russia?
I think the message is that they want to settle the war in Ukraine, for sure. Absolutely. I think that's probably already started.
But most people assume that's bullish for Russia. And yet we're hearing reports that they might give more access to Ukraine, to those long-range weapons to fire into Russia. And maybe no one's saying they're going to take land back or whatnot. But why does Russia seem to be a little bit on the back foot about this?
I think because when Trump was last time in power, even as he sounded friendly himself to Putin, everyone around him was anti-Russia. It was one of the strongest anti-Russia cabinets that we had seen in a long time. And Bill Browder came on this network and said, it's so strange. Trump talks this way and everybody underneath him talks that way. Right? I mean, here's the thing to remember about Trump, and I think about this in particular with China, and this is going to sound weird when I say this. he's weirdly less ideological in some ways. In other words, he doesn't want the country to be taken advantage of. That's his viewpoint, right? And so while both Democrats and Republicans are hawkish on China, Democrats couch it in human rights, lack of democracy. Trump doesn't have those concerns. If they can come to a deal of some kind, and he can say, I got a better deal, just like he says, I got a better deal out of Mexico, I think there's actually a deal to be done there. And part of bringing in people like Rubio, to your point, is to send a signal he's going to be tough.
Dewardric, what would you add to that?
I think the Chinese are very aware that Trump is transactional. I mean, the real issue here is deal for what? And, you know, they tried to float some early conversations about Taiwan and sort of becoming less supportive of Taiwan's diplomatic space and weapon sales, and none of that went anywhere ultimately. But it doesn't mean that the Chinese won't try, and it doesn't mean that Trump won't listen. But I think this administration, at least in terms of the way it's shaping up, from the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, if he picks Rubio, if Lighthizer comes back, this is a real hawkish administration that I think will try and keep much of the competition agenda that we've seen in the Biden administration in place and ramp it up. But the Chinese will certainly take their shots and try and cut a deal.
To Ukraine, am I remembering correctly, Dewardric, that Senator Rubio voted against additional funding for Ukraine?
Correct. I think Michelle is spot on here. I think on Ukraine, separate from China, I think Rubio is in line with where most of the Republican Party is, with the exception of Mitch McConnell and others, about bringing this war to a close. But I will make note, Tyler, that China has a role to play here. They have been Russia's lifeline. And so for Putin, this is golden. There's a broad open chessboard now for him to play both sides off of each other in the Ukraine conflict. So look for Putin's diplomacy to really kick into gear here and try and leverage China and the U.S. on Ukraine.
Very interesting. Dewardric, thanks. Dewardric McNeal, we appreciate it.